Iran, Persia, Sasanids, Parthians, these words are probably well known to many of you, but today I want to talk about those who came before. Iran means land of the Aryans, encompassing multiple cultural groups that descend from the Proto-Indo-Europeans, specifically the branch known as the Indo-Iranians or Aryans. But before they arrived in these lands, Iran was already home to hard-working men and women, great cities, monumental temples and wise kings, a crucible of art, trade and religion, a nation that fought for its independence against powerful kingdoms and empires, and that in some cases conquered those same empires with surprisingly little effort. So this is the story of one of the oldest kingdoms in human history, whose name is mentioned 28 times in the Bible as a land of exceptional archers and military might: Elam. Elam was an ancient kingdom in what is now the provinces of Elam and Khuzestan, developing from the late 4th millennium BC. The Elamites were usually represented with medium to dark skin, genetically similar to the native Iranian Neolithic farmers from the Iranian plateau, and a linguistic parallel to Dravidian Indians has been theorized, but a genetic link hasn't been confirmed yet. During the Proto-Elamite period between 3200 and 2700 BC, following earlier cultural and material influence from the Ubaid culture of Mesopotamia, Susa emerged as a major urban center, and over time that would become one of the great capitals of the ancient Middle East. At this time, tablets appeared bearing pictographic writing and accounting systems, clearly adapted from Mesopotamian models. Not just writing, also ceramics, metallurgical techniques, certain artistic motifs, and urban administration, which implies a strong economic and cultural contact. Because of this, together with the adoption of military technologies, architectural styles and more, Elam's status as a civilization separate from Mesopotamia is debatable, especially when such distinctions depend largely on technologies and systems of organizations. To claim that they were a completely separate civilization will be comparable to arguing that France and the Czech Republic don't belong to the same Western civilization, despite having related traditions and derived writing systems, among other things. From a very early period, Elam appears in Sumerian sources as Kur-Nim-Maki, which literally means the high land. This inspired the later Semitic Akkadian name Elamki, the source of the Hebrew name Elam. The Elamites themselves, however, called their land Haltamti, which just means our land. Very creative, innit? Their country was sometimes described as a dangerous enemy and at other times as an important trading partner. The Mesopotamians needed raw materials, metals and products that arrived precisely via routes crossing Elamite territory. Meanwhile, Elam benefited from acting as an intermediary between the Iranian plateaus and the Indus Valley on one side and the Mesopotamian city-states on the other. During the Old Elamite period, from the 27th century BC onward, sources become richer and allow us to better trace Elam's role in regional politics. In the 2600s BC, Elam was one of the two sides in the earliest recorded war in history, the Sumero-Elamite War, between the city-state of Kish and Elam, which was both started and won by the city of Kish. In the 23rd century BC, Elam fell under the influence of the Semitic Akkadian Empire, founded by Sargon the Great, who extended his rule from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Yet their relationship wasn't always peaceful. Elam exploited periods of Akkadian crisis and fragmentation to reassert its own autonomy. Something similar happened under the 3rd dynasty of Ur, the Neo-Sumerian Empire. When the Sumerians were prosperous, they projected their control over Susa and Elamite regions, but when they weakened, the local rulers fought for independence, eventually reclaiming it. And in 2004, the Elamites carried the war westward, sacking Ur, the capital, delivering the final blow to the empire. During the following centuries, the Elamites consolidated a strong political identity, while continuing to absorb Sumerian and Semitic cultural influences. In more peaceful times, the land of the highlands was seen by Mesopotamia as a respectable and wise land, to the point that in diplomatic relations, Mesopotamians referred to Elamite kings as fathers, meanwhile the Elamites referred to the Mesopotamian ones as sons. During the Middle Elamite period, from the 15th to the 12th century BC, Elam became a regional power capable of exerting significant influence over Babylonian politics. Although, for most of their existence, Susa was their capital, its society was hierarchical. At the summit stood the king, whose authority carried a pronounced sacred character, legitimized through divine titles and close association with the temples. Below the monarch was an elite composed of high officials, military leaders and priests, responsible for resource administration and the supervision of rituals. Beneath them were specialized artisans and merchants, and at the base, peasants and dependent workers tied to agriculture and to the demands of temples and palaces. But this hierarchy wasn't rigid like a caste system. Social position could depend on wealth, skill or service to palace and temple, which allowed for a degree of mobility, particularly for artisans, merchants or soldiers who distinguished themselves. Even though royal and religious power remained concentrated, it was still partially a theocracy. The possibility of moving between social classes likely encouraged innovation and competition, something far less common in societies without mobility or those structured around caste system. A similar case happened in Sumer. No wonder the Mesopotamians invented so many freaking things, am I right? And in Elamite society, women enjoyed more rights than in many other ancient ones, including Babylon, Assyria, the Hittite world, and especially Greece. They could own land, inherit property, and participate in administration, sometimes even reaching high official roles. And Elamite art reflects a notable degree of gender parity, and some professionals will go as far as to say that many women were represented in art with a higher regard than the men. But they still remained under a male-oriented society where marriage was central. Compared to the Mesopotamian society right next to them, they enjoyed relative economic and social autonomy, though still not full equality. But I mean, that's still really impressive from a society from over 3,000 years ago. None of this is exaggerated and the sources are on screen. Religion was the integrating axis of their culture. The Elamite pantheon included several deities, but the most important one was in Shushinak, the patron deity of Susa, the Elamite god of justice, the underworld and royal power. Two of Elam's principal deities were female, Pinikir and Kiriricha. The construction and restoration of temples was one of the king's primary obligations, and in their royal inscriptions, victories and prosperity were usually attributed to divine favor. Artistically, Elam developed highly distinctive styles, especially in bronze work, ceramics, reliefs, and architecture. A great example of the latter was the Shoga Sambil, Duruntash, a sanctuary city featuring temple complexes and a massive ziggurat. And when I say massive, I mean about 50 meters tall. That's literally half of the requirement for being considered a skyscraper. Written culture played an important role in administration and religious practice. In its earliest phases, Proto-Elamite script was used, still only partially deciphered, mainly for economic and accounting purposes, before cuneiform writing was adopted. Elam's economy was based on irrigated agriculture, focused on cereals such as barley and wheat, alongside orchards and fruit trees. Livestock husbandry was also essential, especially of goats, cattle and sheep. A key practice was the exploitation of mineral resources and semi-precious stones in the Zagros foothills. Elam had access to copper and tin for bronze production, as well as lapis lazuli and other valued stones, giving it a nice strategic advantage over Mesopotamia. The Elamites happily exported metals, semi-precious stones, textiles and agricultural products, and imported manufactured goods, timber, oils such as Sumerian sesame oil, and other luxury items. And regarding the internal economy, surviving economic administrative texts reveal rationing systems, labor contracts, and records of deliveries of grain, animals, and manufactured goods. The private land ownership coexisted with temples and palace states, and the upper classes collected rents through taxes in kind or compulsory labor. This structure made it possible to mobilize resources for monumental construction, the maintenance of armies, and participation in international trade networks, which made Elam a major economic and military power in the ancient Middle East. Under King Shutruk-Nahunte, around the 12th century BC, Elamite armies attacked Babylon, defeating the Kassite dynasty of Babylon and launched looting campaigns that transported immense spoils to Susa. Among the seized objects was the famous diorite stele bearing the laws of Hammurabi, which ended up displayed triumphantly in the Elamite capital. That quite literally implies both the military superiority of the Elamites and the cultural prestige that Babylon continued to hold in the eyes of everyone around them as a banner of law and economic order. But this apparent Elamite domination was a bit short-lived. A few decades later, Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon launched a counterattack, defeating the Elamites and sacking Susa. So yeah, the guy played the reverse Uno card. That started a dark age in Elamite history, with fewer sources and greater political fragmentation. Throughout a quarter of the first millennium BC, various local kingdoms and dynasties rose and fell, and the nation became increasingly exposed to pressure from emerging powers, especially Assyria. However, around 750 BC, there was a political and cultural revival, known as the Neo-Elamite period, or the Elamite Renaissance, whatever you want to call it. Elam regained significant prominence. Its kings exploited internal rivalries within Mesopotamia and allied with Chaldean and Aramean groups, peoples who will be very important for world history, to challenge Assyrian hegemony. Elam repeatedly supported Babylonian attempts to restore independence from Assyria, sending troops and resources. This role as an ally of Assyria's enemies provoked a brutal and enraging response from the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Sennacherib and later Ashurbanipal organized devastating campaigns that penetrated deep into Elamite territory. Assyrian chronicles describe, with obvious propaganda, the sack of cities, forced deportations of entire populations, and according to Assyrian sources, the total destruction of Susa. If you were to follow their propaganda, they completely erased it from the map. While these accounts are clearly exaggerated, one thing is certain: the Elamite kingdom was severely shattered, losing much of its military and political capacity and falling into a state of permanent crisis. After the death of Ashurbanipal, the Medes and Babylonians conspired to dismantle the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Elam, though weakened, contributed by maintaining constant pressure along Assyria's eastern border. The Elamites provided support, refuge and strategic knowledge to the Medes to the best of their ability, forcing Assyria to disperse forces and resources. This accumulated pressure weakened even Assyria's ability to respond to revolts and decisive attacks, contributing to the fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire by 609 BC, after which Elam was incorporated into the Median Empire. And then, in the mid-6th century BC, the Persian Empire emerged from the Median state under Cyrus the Great, and Elam was absorbed into the new imperial structure. And the land, especially Susa, came to be known as Hujiya, a name that later evolved into Khuzestan. Within the Achaemenid framework, Elam ceased to exist as an independent kingdom, but it became a very important satrapy. Elamite tradition didn't disappear entirely. Religious, artistic and administrative elements inherited from Elam continued to influence Persian culture, and the worship of Elamite deities persisted locally. Therefore, the Elamite culture survived long after the disappearance of its monarchy. Susa was actually the setting of a major work, the Book of Esther from the Bible, set in the capital of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Yeah, you heard that right. Susa was the main capital of the largest empire of the ancient world, one with one of the best administrations as well, for roughly 70 years, with Elamites serving as the main administrative language during that period. But let's talk about Esther. Her name derives from Ishtar, the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war. In short, the story tells of Esther, queen and wife of the Persian king Xerxes. She's Hebrew, but keeps her identity as a secret. An asshole called Haman lies to the king, claiming that Hebrews are disloyal and dangerous and will one day betray Persia. You know, the usual anti-Semitic stuff. This guy was the first anti-Semite, freaking hell. Convincing Xerxes to sign a decree that implies their unaliving. And Esther, instead of hiding her identity for personal safety, reveals that she is also Hebrew, proving that they're not evil. And then Xerxes realizes God damn, the woman I love is Hebrew. No, quickly, make a counter decree. Haman falls on Esther's couch and begs before her for mercy, humiliated. And Xerxes, interpreting this as an assault, decides that remaining alive is not actually part of Haman's future, and he is executed by hanging. That's pretty much it. It's also one of the few books of the Bible not set in Canaan, and one of the very few who doesn't explicitly mention God. And just so you know, there is no direct historical evidence confirming the existence of these figures beyond Xerxes himself. Also, the oldest complete surviving theatrical play, The Persians, written by Aeschylus in 472 BC, is also set in Susa as the imperial capital. During the Parthian Persian Empire, Susa served as the capital of an important province and was home to some of the most skilled archers of the empire. And that's it throughout its history. Elam was crucial to the politics of Bronze and Iron Age civilizations, acting both as a military rival to Mesopotamia and as a cultural bridge between two different worlds. Susa still exists today, known as Shush, inhabited continuously as a fully civilized city for longer than any other city in human history. And no, Jericho doesn't count, it wasn't fully civilized until later, but Susa indeed was, from around 3000 BC, giving it more than 5 millenniums of continuous habitation. The history of the Elamites doesn't end with the fall of Susa or with the disappearance of their monarchy. For centuries, Elam fought for its independence against the great powers of its time, Ur, Babylon and Assyria. These were constant confrontations with empires that sought to subjugate its territory, control its resources and erase its autonomy. Time and again, the Elamites were conquered, and time and again they rebelled. For them, independence wasn't just an abstract idea, it was pure survival. And that impulse didn't vanish with Persia nor with the passing of millennia. The region remained a tense frontier between its people and centralized authority, because the Elamites didn't disappear. They didn't anatomically dissolve into history. It is evident that their descendants still inhabit southwestern Iran today, in Khuzestan and the province of Elam. And those two names aren't coincidences. Both are modern adaptations of the name of Elam, an ancient memory that even the Islamic State itself acknowledges, even if it doesn't always respect those who inhabit that territory. The Iranian Islamic regime isn't merely controversial, it is objectively tyrannical. It represses, imprisons, silences and executes. It denies basic rights, persecutes dissidents, and responds to protests with violence. It isn't a matter of opinion or perception, it is a fact. The protests of today are neither exaggerated nor the product of foreign manipulation. They are the struggle of the Iranians for dignity, freedom, and for the people they love. Each Iranian who chooses to protest, despite the obvious danger, does so with the courage and conviction to someone sent into this world by thousands of ancestors before them. And many millenniums later, the same soil that once saw Elam resist ancient empires now witnesses its own people standing up to tyrannical power, refusing to be oppressed. Names and languages may have changed, but the struggle for independence and against injustice is perpetual. Dozens of thousands, probably close to 100,000 of Iranians have lost their lives in the span of merely 5 weeks. That is a rate evidently higher than that of all of the other events that have drawn the attention of activists worldwide. The Elamites, even if they now bear another name, will endure. The Akkadian Empire fell, Ur did as well, Assyria, Babylon, even Achaemenid Persia, and by the looks of it, the Islamic State may share a similar fate rather sooner than later. Dominant states of the past didn't withstand the cold and indifferent passing of time. With the humans that they ruled over, the people, they did. The blood and memory of human beings like you and me continues to inhabit these lands of hard-working men and women, great cities, monumental temples, and wise kings.